Today we're going to be talking about two people. The first person is Josh Phillips. He was born in Jacksonville, Florida on March 17, 1984. His parents are Melissa and Steve Phillips. He also had a brother named Tim Phillips who was older than him. An important detail from early on is that Steve used to be violent towards his family. He wasn't just strict, he would also frequently become enraged over the most trivial and absurd things. On the show, Too Young to Kill, 15 Shocking Crimes, Josh recalls a moment in his life when he walked into his parents' room and saw his father's fist smashed through the wall. This sight made him feel terrified of his own father. According to his account, Steve gave his son very strict and rigid rules to follow. He was also struggling with severe substance abuse and chronic alcoholism. He would also become incredibly frustrated and angry if John brought other kids to the house when he wasn't there, and he had a particular aversion to young girls. Melissa, his wife, said she never understood why her husband harbored such a strong dislike toward young girls. It should be noted, however, that despite all of this, Josh was not violent and never actually behaved in that way. He didn't have a background like his father's. In fact, it was quite the opposite. In the neighborhood, he was known as a very calm young man. In fact, as you can see, it wasn't a very normal family. The father was known to have highly unusual rules and very odd fixations, but Josh seemed like a genuinely good kid, according to those who knew him well. At that time, he was just 14 years of age. And now, we must move on to the main part of our story and the central victim in this case. Who exactly was Maddie Clifton? Who was she, and how did she end up involved in everything I mentioned earlier? Madeline Ray Clifton was a bright 8-year-old girl at the time, who lived just across the street from the Phillips family. Her parents were Steve and Sheila Clifton, who loved her very much. She had a sister just a bit older than her named Jessica, who was 11 years old. It makes me very sad that there isn't much information circulating about her, that the case has been overshadowed by those who believe the perpetrator deserves mercy instead of remembering the victim. According to her family, friends, and people in the neighborhood, she was a very happy girl. She loved going out to play with her sister, really liked sports, and apparently did well in school, and from what we could see, had several friends. She was loved by those who knew her to the point that what happened to her was truly devastating for many. But as I said, there isn't much information about her. First, because she was only 8 years old, and second, because she was completely overshadowed. So with this little bit of context, let's move on to the day of the events. It was November 3rd, 1998 in the afternoon. Maddie asked her mother if she could go out to the street to play with some friends and neighbors from the neighborhood, to which her mother said yes, because this was very common. Besides, they were going to be right there near her house, at the doors of houses of people they had known for years. And it's important to clarify that when I say the family's neighbors were friends, I mean they were people they knew personally, even since childhood. So Maddie went out to play with her mother's permission and came back a while later to look for golf balls, since they were playing with them and were running out. Sheila told her to look for them outside. That was the very last moment she ever saw her beloved daughter alive. Around 5 in the afternoon, Maddie Clifton disappeared. Jessica came back without her little sister. She didn't know where she could be. They immediately started looking for her. First Jessica on her bike, her mother calling out for her, going to different houses, soon searching everywhere, but they couldn't find her. The police began investigating while the neighborhood searched for Maddie, posters with her face, the girl's family on the news. It was terrible. Maddie's mother stood in front of cars with her daughter's face to make her known. Everyone was helping. And as I said before, people there knew each other quite well. Everyone was willing to look for her. The Phillips family was also involved in the search, supposedly helping out to find her. The first suspect to be mentioned in this case was the next-door neighbor, Larry Grisham. Grisham had been arrested twice in the past, with both incidents occurring roughly 15 to 20 years earlier, for cases of sexual assault. But in both incidents, the cases were dismissed. Grisham had failed a polygraph test in connection with Maddie's disappearance, but he provided a very solid alibi. The thing to keep in mind about polygraph tests is that they can easily fail. Obviously, they didn't prove that he had anything to do with it, and in fact, he didn't. Over time, the police suspended the search for Maddie, but the community, including about 400 volunteers, persisted. A reward was offered, initially set at $50,000, but it was later doubled. One of the volunteers was the person I mentioned at the beginning, Josh Phillips. The FBI eventually got involved in the case. Flyers were distributed throughout the city. There was a suspicion that Maddie was still somewhere in this neighborhood, where she had disappeared, possibly in one of the houses. So they kept searching there, and they were right. The search finally came to an end a full week after the disappearance, when Joshua's mother, Melissa, went to clean her son's room and noticed something incredibly strange under his bed. Interestingly, Josh's bed had a large water mattress. In fact, that's one of the things people remember most about him. And this mattress seemed to have a leak. His mother went to investigate the situation because she was absolutely convinced it was water, a water leak. But once she lifted the mattress, she stumbled upon something sinister underneath. Concealed deep within that space, right there inside, was Maddie's body. And she had found it simply by pulling on one of her own stockings. Let's remember that the police were searching the neighborhood, and Maddie's house was right across the street. That is, they were also waiting in her yard. So for a moment she paused to think about what was happening, as if time had completely frozen in place. But in the end, she decided to do the right thing. Melissa quickly left her house and walked across the quiet street to tell them exactly what she had discovered hidden inside her own son's bedroom. What followed was telling all of this to the people who had been searching for the girl all that time. The reaction of the people when they heard this was absolutely heartbreaking. There were people fainting, crying. They just couldn't believe what had happened. It was absolutely sickening from every single angle you looked at it. But also, the context was very different from what it is now. We're talking about a neighborhood that had fences all around it, where every person knew each other well, and where the neighbors' children would go out to play together all the time. It was perfectly ordinary for them to be outside, and they never could have imagined that such a horrific tragedy could happen, much less that the culprit would be this boy who was only 14 years old. Josh Phillips was arrested that day at his school and was placed in maximum security during his first appearance in the trailer. Now, the reality regarding what Josh was truly like was a bit disturbing because people saw him as a reserved and soft-spoken young man, when in fact he was anything but that. Maddie and Jesse didn't see him as an innocent boy, but quite the opposite. Both of these children had once mentioned to their grandmother that this 14-year-old boy had made some rather strange sexual remarks to them, and had also attempted to show them a porn magazine. Furthermore, it's important to know that they didn't consider him a friend. In other words, he didn't usually play with Maddie, and he wasn't the first option in the search because they really didn't think he talked to Maddie enough to be with her that day. And this is extremely important to keep in mind when you are reviewing Josh's story. According to the detailed results of the forensic examinations, it was determined that the cause of Maddie Clifton's death was that she was stabbed and beaten several times with a baseball bat. Maddie also had her entire lower body completely exposed. Her underwear was missing, but her socks were still pulled on. The statement provided by Josh is alarming for several key reasons. He said that the incident happened one afternoon when he was home alone and Maddie came over to ask him if he actually knew how to play the game of baseball. Joshua Phillips agreed, even though he wasn't allowed to have friends over when his parents weren't home. While the two of them were playing baseball, Maddie threw the ball to him and he struck it with full force, which caused the bat to strike the girl directly in the eye, causing her to bleed profusely and leaving Maddie crying and screaming in pain. Josh was immediately overcome with a sense of pure panic at that moment, terrified of how his father might react when he finally got home and saw all of this. Josh desperately proceeded to convince Maddie to come into his house, and then, once they were inside his room, he viciously strangled her with a phone cord for about 15 minutes until she was gone. Shortly after, he hit her again with the baseball bat. Here we already see completely unnecessary acts, and he hid her under his bed. And why do I emphasize this small but very significant detail that he basically tried to kill her twice from the very beginning? And it's that by that point, one would think he had already accomplished his goal. Instead, hitting her again with the baseball bat strongly indicates that he was probably trying to deliberately cause her physical harm, in the sense that it was no longer necessary, and was only out of pure rage. And it doesn't end there. Not long after Josh's father had entered the house, Josh went to talk to him for a brief moment. He then returned to his room and was shocked to discover that Maddie was still alive, moaning softly from under his bed. He quickly pulled out the mattress and stabbed her 11 more times, killing her again. That is, the previous two things hadn't killed her apparently, according to him. And this part, yes, although the story is a bit strange. Rather, everyone believes that he deliberately lured her to the house, that it wasn't a game, that Maddie didn't just go there by chance, but that he had been planning this for quite some time. As I said before, they weren't friends, so it's strange that they would start playing together, and that Jessica didn't see anything. Furthermore, according to this version of the story, Maddie must have screamed quite a lot, and for a significant period of time was outside the house. So someone should have heard her, or she should have run to her house asking for help. But no one heard her. She never ran toward her house. And so, the entire story becomes incredibly difficult for anyone to truly believe. Josh surely brought her inside without any excuse about the baseball game and started to act. And actually, there's an even worse, more chilling detail about the case, which is that Maddie's family, at some point before all of this happened, had discovered that some things in their house were placed in strange locations and that certain highly specific objects were missing, such as a personal photo of Jessica doing rhythmic gymnastics while wearing a leotard. Keeping this in mind, a formal complaint was never filed, but the police were informed when the case came to light. Because of this, an officer went to Josh's house, as he did with many other houses, suspecting that they might be responsible for the theft, maybe as a prank or something like that. This officer was able to enter Josh's house when he was alone and talk to the young man while he was lying on his bed, before all of this was discovered. In other words, he was sitting on top of Maddie's body, but I didn't notice that at any moment because the room was a mess. There were pet cages on the floor full of feces, so they covered up any smell that might have been there. Also, the mattress wasn't a regular one, it was a waterbed, so it already felt a bit strange to sit on it. The thing is, once what had really happened came to light, the family realized a very important little detail. The photo they had lost of their daughter Jessica, that is, Maddie's sister, was on Josh's nightstand. He wasn't after Maddie, but after her sister. They believed that most likely, if he hadn't been discovered, he would have continued his crimes with Jessica. Moreover, it makes sense because Jessie was closer to Josh's age, since she was 11 years old, and so he probably knew her better, maybe from school, from friends, from talking. But the thing is, he was probably planning to go after Jessie. Joshua Phillips was charged with first-degree murder. His trial was held in Polk County. Due to the extensive media coverage, he was sentenced and condemned to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for being under 16 years old. He was not eligible for the death penalty under Florida law at that time. Although the parents of young Phillips have frequently complained that he was tried as someone over 14 years of age, and not as someone his actual age. But the reality is that he had killed a girl and no one believed it was accidental. Rather, it was clearly seen as premeditated. While the autopsy found no trace of sexual assault, Maddie's body was found naked from the waist down, as I mentioned before. But it should also be noted that the body was already in an advanced state of decomposition. The more time passes, the harder it is to determine these things. And it is believed that it was indeed a crime with a sexual motive, but Josh never admitted to such a thing. According to what he said, the murder seems to have been motivated by Josh's fear of his aggressive and alcoholic father, who would have been very angry if he had found Maddie in the house. This is, let's say, his personal narrative, and his reason for committing this heinous crime. It doesn't explain why Maddie's clothes had mysteriously and magically disappeared, because according to him, her underwear had fallen off in the middle of the entire struggle while he was carrying the body to the mattress. And it also doesn't explain why there were so many stab wounds or why he tried to kill her over and over again. Joshua Phillips stated during an interview on the television program Too Young to Kill that if he had the power to turn back the hands of time, he certainly would, as he began to cry. Once in prison, Josh attended the Blackstone Career Institute in a distance learning program, successfully earning a paralegal degree in 2007. He currently works as a paralegal, actively helping other inmates with their appeals. Sometime after the trial, Maddie's parents, Clifton, Steve, and Sheila, divorced after 25 years of marriage. And in the year 2000, Joshua's father, Steve, passed away in a fatal car accident. As for the appeals he filed, there were several instances. In 2002, a court of appeals upheld Phillips's conviction, meaning that from that moment on, they no longer agreed that he should be released. In December 2004, Melissa Phillips, his mother, began to request a new trial for her son, arguing that his young age at the time of the murder should have carried more weight in his sentencing. In 2005, entirely new dates were officially scheduled for Phillips's hearing. In 2008, 3 years later, two of the officials involved in his sentencing, State Attorney Harry George and Sheriff Nat Glover, publicly reaffirmed their long-standing belief that Phillips deserved to be behind bars, but they openly admitted that they harbored significant doubts about the life sentence without parole for the then 14-year-old. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling stating that sentencing juveniles to life imprisonment without parole is unconstitutional. At that time, it was still unclear whether Josh's lawyer would request a new sentence. Then, in November 2015, this defense attorney interpreted the Supreme Court's ruling as sufficient grounds to request a new hearing for a new sentence. In September 2016, after Joshua's lawyer successfully appealed to the court, he was granted a new hearing for a new sentence as a result of the retroactive application of the Supreme Court's ruling that declared his current sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, unconstitutional for juvenile offenders. At that point, a date was set for a new sentencing in February 2017. That February, Joshua's lawyer requested more time to prepare, and subsequently a new date was set for June of that year. At the June hearing, the victim's mother finally requested that his sentence be reaffirmed in November of that year. Joshua Phillips' conviction was upheld, and he was once again sentenced to life in prison, making the entire effort futile. Furthermore, Maddie's family continued to insist that he could not be set free. What's interesting is that in 2018, Josh finally made a public apology, which I will leave here for you to see. This is for the family of Maddie Clifton. I've wanted to say this for a very long time, and I am grateful that this chance to do so in person
has arrived. I don't pretend to know or understand your pain or the depth of the void that I have created in your lives. I can say this. I do understand pain. I have become quite intimate with suffering growing up in prison. I have seen many dark things, and I've been to some dark places many times throughout this journey. I came dreadfully close to ending my life just to escape it all. During those difficult times, I was embroiled in a flurry of emotions and feelings: guilt, despair, pain, hopelessness, fear, and shame. Each time I was somehow able to keep going, mostly because I couldn't bear the thought of putting my mother through any more trauma or heartache. She's been through enough. There were times when I was angry at her because I couldn't end my pain due to her love. Yet now I'm truly and eternally grateful to her for that. I feel an immense sense of gratitude toward her because as I've grown up, I've truly learned the inherent value of human life. I've learned to see the hidden beauty and joy in a world so full of strife, and to experience the profound truth of unconditional love. I wish to God that I could have known this or fully understood it when I was only 14. If I had, absolutely none of these tragic events would have ever taken place. I had no idea then what life really meant, what death meant, or the profound depths of agonizing suffering that could follow a single, impulsive act. I had no inkling of how long that suffering could last. I hadn't lived long enough to understand the time involved or what true suffering was. I did something terrible. I'm so deeply sorry. I'm so truly sorry for what happened, even now, after all these years. It's just completely unfathomable that every single bit of this could have happened. It tears my mind apart to know that I have taken away such a precious life from you and from the world. I so wish I could take away your pain. I am thankful to God that I've been able to continue moving forward in life and grow, but not a day goes by that I don't think about what led me to where I am. Not just in prison, but in life. I pray every day that you are able to live your lives despite the deep pain and harm I have caused you. I am deeply grateful to have the chance for physical freedom. Any joy that arises in my heart is immediately tempered by the knowledge that these proceedings bring everyone involved once again face to face with the horror that occurred in 1998 when I walked the rec yard here in chains. I look to the sky through mesh wiring, and I thank God, repeatedly asking for forgiveness. I hope that every breath I take from now on is always devoted to wishing you peace and healing. All my hopes, fears, and wishes probably mean nothing to you, but they are there all the same. May you know peace. May you be free from suffering, and may you feel the love that is the sustenance of life itself. May God bless you and heal your wounds as much as possible. Thank you, Your Honor.
There are certain parts that might be interesting, some that really seem like an apology. But what's particularly strange is that he always refers to himself or to Maddie's family, but never once actually mentions Maddie herself. That is, at no point does he say that he apologizes for having murdered Maddie specifically, or that he regrets what happened. Instead, he talks about the consequences, about what he had to go through, and that he hopes the family can be at peace and that he prays for them. Which is a bit strange. Incredibly, this is something that is repeated among several people convicted of the same thing. Very little is said about the victim and much more about themselves. What's also incredible is that apparently all these appeals for him to be granted some kind of freedom are forcing the family to relive the case over and over again. But the parents' request remains the same. They can't let him go free, even more so because since he had intentions and was planning it, he might do it again. In other words, nothing guarantees it because from the very beginning it wasn't a misunderstanding, and we really doubt that it had anything to do with the issue of the father, because he was obsessed with Jessica, he was obsessed, and so with the idea of doing to Jessica what he did to Maddie, to Jessica Jessie. For her part, Maddie's sister now lives in the childhood home where they used to live together, and she doesn't plan on leaving. That is, she keeps that house as a good memory of her sister, remembers her with great affection, and even though it was something very sad, she still decided to stay there. It's not a happy ending, it's not a good ending, but at least it's resolved. We know what happened, the culprit can be found, and it was possible to prevent him from doing this to the victim's sister as well. Therefore, the case is now solved and closed.